We start with another erratic foreign policy statement from Donald Trump. The latest ally to fall foul of the US president is South Korea. In a surprise announcement, the president ordered the Pentagon to scale back joint military drills with South Korea just hours before they began. The Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises are an annual event designed to beef up military readiness against a threat from North Korea. The war games are scheduled to run for the next 11 days and involve thousands of US and South Korean troops. It's not clear what part of the drills will be downsized. Well, Donald Trump announced his orders to the Pentagon via social media. He wrote that based on his very good relationship with Kim Jong Un of North Korea, he wasn't happy the US was participating in joint military exercises with South Korea. He went on to describe the manoeuvres as costly and sending a signal that he's totally inappropriate and hostile to North Korea, a country that he said had been unthreatening and respectful as long as he had been president. He added that he'd instructed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce the exercises. Making a final point, Mr. Trump said he'd recently asked the South Korean president to join the US in the denuclearization of Iran and been told no thanks. Donald Trump's relationship with Kim Jong Un has certainly seen its fair share of ups and downs. In his first term, Mr. Trump called the North Korean leader Little Rocket Man, only to later say they'd fallen in love after exchanging personal letters. There were also 3 face-to-face summits in Vietnam, Singapore, and in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Those talks, though historic, produced no breakthrough on Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs. Despite today's downsizing of joint exercises, Seoul says it welcomes a warming of ties between Washington and Pyongyang to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula. Well, Jenny Town is a leading expert on US-North Korean relations. She's a senior fellow at the Stimson Center think tank and director of their 38 North program. Welcome to DW. This decision from Donald Trump appears to have come out of the blue. Are you as surprised by it as everyone else appears to be?
Yes, it was quite a surprise on a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening here in DC. As it seems to be based on very little actual changes in the environment.
So what do you think, then, is behind this Trump decision? And why do it on the morning that those exercises started?
I mean, that is the important question. I don't think we know exactly what the intention here was. And of course, Trump in his tweet on Truth, his post on Truth Social talked about how he has a good relationship with Kim Jong Un, how this sends the wrong signals to North Korea, to do these large scale exercises, and that it's, overly provocative in that measure. But then he also tied it to, well, South Korea didn't help us in Iran, so why should, we continue to do these exercises that are costly and all of this? So, there may be a little bit of assumption here that this could be a gesture to the North Koreans, knowing that Trump has wanted to revive diplomacy with North Korea since the beginning of his second term. But I think it's the way that it's done is going to be uncompelling to Pyongyang, that this was a real serious gesture, given that he did wait so long to do it. And if that was really the intention behind it, it should have been canceled a long time ago or scaled back a long time ago.
Because if you're serious, you don't do it on the morning of the actual exercises. Right. And what about Seoul? What should they be reading into this? What should the South Korea be reading into this?
That's definitely the more confusing message here. And there have been other tensions in the alliance already, especially over trade issues, investment issues, and business issues. But, this is one area where, the timing doesn't make a lot of sense. All of the preparation was already done for it. And I think, it just goes back to this notion of the U.S. is one more example of how the U.S. is becoming, the credibility of the U.S. is really eroding as an alliance partner. These are routine exercises. They're necessary for practicing how the two might cooperate in a contingency, in a combat contingency. And so, this to tie it then to something that South Korea didn't do that the US wanted them to do, this is a really bad signal for the alliance and for alliance management.
And so let's follow that thought then. Where does that leave this alliance? Everybody now has to go back to their desks, and much as America's NATO allies have done, and said, well, right, what do we do now? Is this a temporary aberration, or is this the way things are?
Well, I think, yeah, that is the question ahead of us. And I think the South Koreans have been trying to give the US the benefit of the doubt for quite a while, whereas Europe has been much more skeptical of where the US is actually going. I think South Korea is trying to make the best of a bad situation. And we've seen comments coming out of the Blue House saying that they do hope that there is, that this does signal some kind of negotiation on the horizon for US and North Korea, which, again, I really highly doubt that it does. But, it is a signal that, the alliance and the way that the alliance used to operate, it is just not business as usual anymore. And there do have to be calculations of what does it mean for South Korea to take on more of its own burden? What does it mean if the US is unreliable in even the most simplest basic things like joint military exercises? So I think there's a lot of serious internalization that's going to have to happen here amongst the alliance managers about, what the future of this partnership really is.
Right. I'm interested in the fact that you said that North Korea will not view this as a serious move by Donald Trump, given that it came so late. Well, so let's make that the focus of the next part of this discussion. We'll look at the bromance between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un that started during Trump's first term. We'll take a quick look at a clip from 2019 of the US president becoming the first sitting president to set foot in North Korea, and then come back to you.
I've never expected to meet you at this place.
That's good. It's my honor. Would you like me to step across?
각하께서 한 발자국 건너시면 사상 처음으로 우리 땅을 밟으시는 미국 대통령이 되십니다.
If your excellency take a step forward, you will be the first U.S. president to cross the line.
I'd be very proud to do that. Okay, let's do it. Come on.
여기 위에까지 올라가고 있습니다.
So, Jenny Town, tell us more about the relationship between these two men and who it's benefited.
Well, certainly in the first term, Donald Trump was the first sitting US president to meet with a North Korean leader. It really did create an opportunity at that moment, but one that did not lead to where they wanted it to go. And certainly the North Koreans had built up the expectation that this was going to lead to a breakthrough moment in relations and reset the US-DPRK relations on a very different path. And the failure to get that agreement in 2019, whether at Hanoi or afterwards, really soured the relationship between them. You have seen North Korea and Kim Jong Un since then refrain from saying very negative things about the US, and it has essentially left the door open to, if there is a change in dynamics, that relations could resume. But it created a very high bar as to what it would take to actually do that. And part of that is contingent on the US accepting North Korea's nuclear status. So, whether the US is willing to do that is unclear and unlikely. And whether North Korea will be able to make concessions to their own red lines that they've now drawn as preconditions for negotiations, I think would really depend on what's actually on the table at that time. And certainly a haphazard gesture like what we just saw isn't going to be enough to move that needle.
So what have we gleaned about what it is that Donald Trump wants from Kim Jong Un? Why does he want to re-engage in this way?
Well, I think there's a bit where Donald Trump sees this as unfinished business. I do think he still thinks there's a way to have to pick up where they left off, even though the moment and especially the North Korean stance on its nuclear program has fundamentally changed. And I think, we've seen Donald Trump also, actually want that relationship with leaders like Putin, like Xi Jinping, and, and the way that he talks about Kim Jong Un and he respects Kim Jong Un's power. So I think it's unclear in terms of US interests, what's actually the heart of this agenda and what would be on the table, especially if North Korea is not willing to talk about denuclearization. And so I think that's part of the problem of why we haven't seen a resumption in these talks, is that, there's very little credibility that the US does have something new to offer. And it's something that North Korea actually wants at a time when it has very little urgency to talk to the US, given its relations with Russia and China.
OK, so we have this decision taken the morning that these joint exercises were supposed to start, which do fly in the face of this year's US defense strategy, authored by this administration, which describes North Korea as a direct threat to South Korea and Japan, both of whom are US allies. The same document describes North Korea's nuclear forces as increasingly capable of threatening the US homeland. These forces are growing in size and sophistication, and they present a clear and present danger of nuclear attack on the American homeland. So that's from this year's US defense strategy. So how does today's decision fit in with America's wider goals in this region?
Well, as you point out, there's a lot of incoherency here. I think, if you look back to what the US has done during past negotiations, military exercises, the size and the scale, the scope of these exercises is one of the factors that can be changed to change the environment and to create an environment more conducive to diplomacy. But usually it's done in the course of negotiations, or when there's an actual negotiation either about to happen or that's possible to happen. We heard back in 2018 when Donald Trump said he was going to cancel military exercises in the press conference after the Singapore summit, because they had, created this new pathway and built this new relationship. Doing it right now unilaterally outside that scope, at the last minute, haphazardly, again, if the point was really to use this as a tool to create a different environment for negotiations, he should have canceled it months ago. This has been months in planning. Yes. And that would have sent a signal to say that there was something different going on. But to do it the way they're doing it now, it looks much more a punishment for South Korea than it does a real message for North Korea.
Thank you so much for talking us through that, Jenny. Jenny Town from the Stimson Centre. Professor Hannes Mosler is from the Institute for Korean Studies at the University of Duisburg. Welcome to DW, Professor. Why do you think Donald Trump has done this?
Quite obviously, he's thinking about all his failures in his domestic and foreign policies actions so far, and he's thinking about the mid-elections in November in the US. And so he wants a deal with Kim Jong Un. He wants to engage him. He wants to have a present, have something to present to his, in particular, his domestic audience. But there's, of course, more to the story. But I think that's the main motivation behind it.
Really? You expect a deal between the US and North Korea sometime between now and the midterm elections in November?
No, but probably Trump does, or at least he tries to produce the impression that he is somebody who is able to engage Kim Jong Un, to achieve some movement in the region, and to at least prepare a dialogue, a new summit maybe, or at least make it look that he is able to do a foreign policy that really produces some outcomes. Because as we know, just recently, he produced so many failures in foreign policy. Just think about Iran, so that he needs to distract the audience from his failures and make some additional steps with seem to be attractive, seem to portray him in a successful light. That's what he needs.
So why do it on the day that the exercises start? If this is part of some grand strategy, you would do it ahead of time, because these exercises don't just spring out of nowhere.
Well, I guess this was also strategically decided, because he was not stopping, not changing anything about the exercises, but at the same time, he changed the framing of the meaning of the exercises. So he can continue with the exercises and at the same time signaling to Kim Jong Un, I'm ready to talk, I'm ready to offer you something, so please follow suit and provide some positive signals from Pyongyang to Washington. So that's why he did this at the same time, more or less.
So Trump signals to North Korea, let's talk. What now is the relationship between South Korea and the United States? What do they do medium to long term?
They have a quite good relationship. It all, of course, depends on how Trump does his foreign policy. But on trade issues and also security issues, they are also, I mean, of course, Trump tries to get his piece out of South Korea, but they have very solid deals, and the alliance itself is very strong, remains very strong. But with these plays, with these games by Trump, he tries, of course, to improve his negotiation position vis-a-vis South Korea. But there is no big disagreement. But Trump wants to have a deal with South Korea and with North Korea as well. So he plays both.
Right. So just to be clear, Donald Trump, the US president, on the day that exercises with South Korea start, says, let's scale that back because these people are not our enemies. You believe that South Korea should take from that nothing's really changed. This is Donald Trump just being Donald Trump, and he's still our friend.
At least they shouldn't panic as of now, because we know that Trump is changing from one day to the other. And they have very solid deals with the US, and they are very much in need of the security assistance of the US, of the alliance, the nuclear umbrella, and so on. So they should prepare, of course, what's going to be happening if there is some interaction, some summit meetings or others between the North and the US, because the South Korea wants to remain in the driver's seat, so to speak, or at least on the seat next to it, because once in some distant future there's negotiations about the future of the peninsula, South Korea needs to sit at the table when important decisions are being made. Even this is a distant future, they have to be prepared, but there is no reason for panicking at this point.
Right. I must say you seem surprisingly relaxed about this, because I'm sure there are people in NATO capitals around the world saying, yeah, we've seen this movie before.
Exactly. So he's repeating what he did with NATO, and that's very dangerous, of course. I'm not saying we can just lean back and let it happen. We must be prepared. But so, for example, you don't know how North Korea will be reacting, right? I mean, because as of now, as we all know, North Korea has a very good deal with Russia. It has this military alliance. It gains very important experiences in the war on Ukraine, and it gets the support from Russia for its missile development. So it has actually no reason to talk to Trump, and it's in a very comfortable position. So they could decide on going towards this offer by Trump, but they don't have to. So we have to wait, first of all, how North Korea will be reacting. And I think South Korea, for the last 12 hours or so, is doing quite well, because they are simply saying, we will continue our relationship with the US. We are on a firm alliance, and they have to react once it's getting worse.
Right. Thanks, Professor. Professor Hannes Mosler from the University of Duisburg.